So let's get going. So my name is Igor. I've been working with Mishko on this crazy thing for quite a while. And I'm here to talk to you about data binding and how we do it in Angular. So how many of you know Angular and have been working with Angular and know what data binding is? Okay, about half. Okay, so I'll try to give you some general overview into what data binding is and why it makes sense. But most of the talk will focus on how it works in Angular. And how is it different from everything else that you might see out there? So data binding is a really cool concept which allows you to take your model, bind it to a template, and then render a view out of it. But that's not it. It's not just one-time transformation. It's something that is continuous living. And when you change a model, the view will automatically update for you. This is the true power of data binding. It's like a spreadsheet. You have your model, you change some of the cells, you have formulas. As you change the cells that other formulas depend on, these formulas will update automatically. This is very different from things like jQuery, where you do imperative DOM updates. You have to do a lot of, you have to figure out when the model changes, which part of the view to update, and there's a lot of boilerplate associated with this. With data binding, you just specify, this is my template, declaratively specify how it binds to the model, and then you just work with the model and you mutate the model. And as the model changes, the templating engine will figure out what needs to be done to update the view to reflect all the changes. Now, this data binding can be quite advanced and can get quite complicated. So let's say that we have in this case, we have an array. Well, our model is an array. And we bind it to some template, which will just display a profile of a superhero. But you could have a repeating construct, which will take each element or each item in the array and stamp out as many copies of the template as necessary to iterate and bind every single item in the array. So what you get is a list of superheroes, in this case because a model is obviously superheroes. And the cool thing is that when you push something, new object, to the array, the templating engine will figure out, oh, the model changed. We now have 4 superheroes instead of 3. And it knows what the template looks like. It will just stamp out a new copy of the template and will just update the view for us. And the same is true if we update any of the existing superheroes in an array. The templating engine will figure out, hey, something changed. I need to go and update the view. Again, this is very different from imperative updates of the DOM, where you need to figure out when the model changes and which parts of the DOM to do. There is a lot of work that you have to do. With data binding and declarative templates, you don't have to do that. So this was one-way data binding, where you have model and you bind it to the template, and there is no way for the model to change from the view. This is what we call one-way data binding. And there's also two-way data binding. Two-way data binding is when you bind the model to form controls or some other controls that allow you to change the model. So for example, in this case, I have a model that is bound to the view. It's displaying a profile picture of a superhero. And I also have a form which is bound to the same model. And as we see, it's populated with the same values, so the first name and the last name. And as I change the values in these fields, the model will update automatically. And that change will propagate back to the original template, and it will also update the view that is bound through the one-way data binding. So you really get this spreadsheet-like updates, which is really cool, and it's really easy to do and allows you to build very interactive applications with very little code. So two-way data binding is quite tricky, and the reason why it's tricky is because there are not only text input fields, but we also have radio input fields, we have checkbox input fields, we have select boxes and select boxes where you can select multiple of them. It's really complicated. The good news is that we took care of all of this for you, and Angular comes bundled with data binding, two-way data binding for all of the form controls that are available in HTML. So things like not only text input field, but also like number input field, email input field, URL input field available. And typically, people have many different needs, and you want to have a custom input field. And this is also possible. So we have APIs for building custom input fields. And in order to build these, you really need three components. I'm not going to deep dive into these. I'm just going to mention them. You need a parser. So you need a parser in order to be able to take the value from the input field and push it to the model. For example, in number input field, the number is really string, and you need to convert it to a number unless you're in an HTML5 browser, which does this conversion for you. But in IE, we have to do this conversion by ourselves. You also need a formatter, which is formatting the model on the way to the view. So if you have a, let's say we have a superhero name, Tony, and we want it to be uppercase or something like that, or we want it to be obfuscated. So we can take the model and we can run it through the formatter and display it as stars in the input field or something like that. And we also need the validation. So all of these APIs are available in Angular. I'm not going to deep dive in. We can talk offline about that. But you can build custom input fields if you want to. So, but let's focus on the one-way data binding because there's enough to cover here. So I'm just going to talk mostly about this. If you want to do two-way data binding, it's really the one-way data binding plus figuring out how to do the conversion in the other way. So it's just something in addition to one-way data binding. So in order to do data binding, there are some things that you need, and this is generally applicable to any kind of technology. First one is templating. So you need to be able to have some kind of templating engine which is able to declaratively, through which you can declaratively specify where the data bindings are. And you need a model mutation observation. And model mutation observation is how do you figure out that a model changed? And how do you react to this change to update the view? So these are the minimal requirements you need to implement data binding. And I'm going to talk about how we did this in Angular. Let's start with templating first. So templating in AngularJS is DOM-based. And this is very different from anybody else out there. DOM-based means that we are not working with strings. We're actually letting the browser parse our templates, create the DOM tree, and then we traverse the DOM tree and look for things that tell us, oh, there's a data binding here, I need to do something about it. This allows us to have the templating language, which is just an extension of HTML. Because by adding extra attributes to existing elements or creating a custom elements, the browser will just preserve this in the DOM, and we will find them in the DOM when we traverse the DOM. So let's have a look at the simple template. In this case, we have a list of people, and we're just greeting everybody. So we have a UL, LI, and you repeat person and people, and then we're going to print hello, the person's name for any number of people in a people array. So you can notice that ngRepeat is not a standard HTML tag. This is something that we added, and this is something that we look for when we traverse the DOM tree, and it tells us, oh, here is a part of the DOM that needs to be repeated based on the number of items in the model. In this case, the people model. And we also have data binding. Data binding is just a double curly with some kind of expression, and I'm going to talk about what this expression can be in a minute. Optionally, you can create a fragment out of this and put it into script tag. This is really optional, And that's a very important differentiator. You can create fragments like this and reuse them in your application if you want to, but you don't have to. You can just create HTML file with all these extra tags and attributes, and the browser will just ignore them, but will preserve them in the DOM. And when Angular loads, it will find them and convert them into something that the browser can actually display. So what are the benefits of doing templating in this way? One is that it's very natural. Everybody knows HTML. Is here anybody who doesn't know HTML? Okay, good. Mishka. So everybody knows HTML, and the templating language in Angular is a natural extension of HTML. So it's easy to learn, easy to use. It also ensures that the templates are valid, which means that it's very hard to create a DOM intentionally that is invalid. Or if you do that, if you don't know that you cannot nest certain elements into the table elements or something like that, you can use existing validators, HTML validators, to verify that your templates are valid. It also allows us to create stable DOM. By stable, I mean because we are traversing the DOM, and in case of the repeater, for example, we know that we have a list of greetings or a list of superheroes, and they correspond to a certain model, certain array. Now, if you reorder the same models in the array, so let's say you sort the array in a different way, we can actually take the nodes in the view and reorder them instead of just dumping them and recreating new nodes. And this is important because it allows you to create stable DOM, which in the future will allow us to do nice things like animations, and also already helps us do efficient updates to the DOM. Another thing is interoperability. Because the templates are HTML, you can use things like Haml, for example, to write your templates, and just pre-process them with a Haml compiler and turn them into HTML, and everything will still work. This is the same. This is true for other existing tools like IDEs or some kind of editors and validators. Because everything is just HTML, it works. Yeah.
Hold on. Wait. Protocol.
Protocol. Oh.
Okay, what if you're using like Django templates or Jinja or something, which uses the same syntax as Angular templates, and one templating language, confuses the other one?
Right. So you shouldn't really be doing that.
Well,
because
I am doing that.
So why? The question is, why are you doing that? Why are you mixing the server-side templates and the client-side templates?
Well, I mean, I have to put certain data into the page, so that, the data that the server knows about. I mean, I guess I consider it better that way than to have to do an extra AJAX request on load.
But you could.
That's okay. People want to hang themselves.
Yeah. Like you can do it. So there are APIs you can configure the compiler service in Angular to use something else than double curlies for data binding, and then that will avoid the collision. The reason why I think it's not a good idea to mix the two is because when you're looking at a template, it's hard to figure out what is the client-side part, what is the server-side client, the server-side client part and the client-side part. And also, it's easy to introduce security issues where if you incorrectly interpolate stuff on the server side, you might actually make the client side vulnerable.
So, I mean, are you saying that we should only put Angular in static files?
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you should restrict the use of server-side templating because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to combine the two.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I could show you some code afterward.
Okay, yeah, we can look at some examples, and maybe there are different ways to approach the problem you have. But like we built many applications, and none of them really uses the approach where the server-side templating and client-side templating are heavily mixed. There are some edge cases where it's useful, like for embedding version numbers into script tags, like on the index.html page to get the application running, that kind of stuff. But like heavily mixing the templating on both sides doesn't really make sense.
Good answer. So you can.
Okay.
We have strong opinions.
Yes.
Igor is no different than the rest of us. So, but yeah, let's talk about it more. Hey, you kill Adium before you go to the next.
Sorry. I thought I did that. Apparently not. Okay. Yeah, it's usually me who bugs Mishka about this. So, and the last thing that I want to talk about is efficiency. Because the templating is DOM-based, we can actually target a DOM update to a very specific node instead of having to inner HTML a whole partial or do any kind of big update to the DOM. So let's say you have a big template with many data bindings, and your model changes only in one property. So out of 100 superheroes, only one superhero's name changed. So we can actually go and look into the DOM and find the specific node, text node, that needs to be updated. And this is very easy to do once you have DOM-based templating. So why not use string-based templates? We can look at handlebars. This is just something I copied from the Ember website. And I don't want to pick on Ember. They're doing some cool stuff. But ultimately, I think that the templating they're using is flawed because it's string-based. And we can see it's kind of similar, but instead of ng repeat, they have each construct, which is a repeater. And the reason why string-based templates are not good is that it's very easy to create invalid HTML. I was rewriting a Backbone application the other day, and they have all these little fragments all over the place, and they were including them. And when you have all these little fragments, because you have to have them, not because you want to have them, then it's very easy to nest li into a div or put divs into a ul, because you just don't know. There are so many little pieces that it's hard to create a big picture of how all these templates are going to be combined. Sure.
Oh, just a comment. I think another result of the style of templating is to find a checkbox. You now need a function rather than just using tag. So you're mixing functions into tags now when you need data binding capabilities. Well, if you look at the Ember documentation, instead of having an input type equals checkbox, they have a function make checkbox that you stick in your template.
This is one way.
Okay.
Good comment.
Thanks. The other problem is that it's not compatible with existing tools. So you cannot reuse existing HTML editor, for example, or HTML validator to look at this template and do syntax highlighting. Everything needs to be custom, and it's possible. It just takes a long time for all these tools to catch up. And the stability of DOM is really hard to do once you have string-based templates. So as I said, you have an array, you reorder elements in the array, and now you want the nodes to be reordered as well. And this is hard to do with string-based templates, because with string-based templates, you often do inner HTML to just update a whole chunk of DOM. And once you do inner HTML, you blow away existing DOM nodes and you recreate them. And this is the exact opposite of having a stable DOM. And performance issues. If you not do it properly, you can easily run into performance issues. It's really hard to target a specific DOM node and do like small updates to DOM unless your templating engine is very sophisticated. Let's talk a bit about Angular expressions that I mentioned earlier. So we've seen that we have something like object dereferencing. You can have an object, you can do hero.firstname. In Angular, you can also call functions. So you could have like a getter function. And well, this is not really a good example of getter function, but bear with me. You can call functions and pass arguments to methods. You can also dereference arrays. You can even do simple arithmetics and string operations. And we have a filtering capability where you can just take some result of an expression. It doesn't have to be just first name. It can be anything as complicated as any of the previous expressions, and run it through a function which will convert it. In this case, I have an uppercase filter. So the expression language is a subset of JavaScript with extra stuff added, like the filtering, for example. It's interpreted, and this is a very important thing because that makes the expression secure. We don't use evals. If you start using evals, it's hard to avoid security problems, and it's also hard to get the context execution of the script or of the expression right. And all of the expressions in Angular execute within the context of the scope, and I'll get to that soon. So all of the expressions in Angular are very flexible, but at the same time are intentionally limiting. Like, we don't want you to put too much stuff into the template. You should be able to reference objects. You should be able to call getters if you want to, but you shouldn't be able to do something too crazy and put too much logic into the template, because all the business logic really belongs to the controller. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. The reason for this, controllers are JavaScript, and JavaScript is testable. And if you separate the controllers and view with data binding, then you can test controllers without instantiating the view. If you put too much stuff into the view, then you need to have an end-to-end test or a test that will instantiate the template, compile it, and that makes tests slow. We want the test to be as fast as possible. So please put just simple expressions into the template. And as I mentioned, all of the expressions are executed in the scope, in the context of the scope object. So what is this magical scope object? If you've written any of the Angular applications, you must have seen or come across reference to scope object. So this is an example of a simple controller. We have a my controller, which asks through dependency injection for $scope, which is a scope object for this controller. And then we'll just associate, we'll attach a event listener or event handler and a simple model to the scope. So controllers where all the imperative behavior lives, and controllers publish the model and event handlers onto the scope. So the scope itself is really just an object with some functions, and it contains your model and also event handlers, and these are then available in the template. So the last part is the view, the template, and in the template, all of the stuff that you published on the scope, for example, name and action in this case, are then available in the template and will be called from there. So this is the scope is the execution context for all of the expressions used in the template. So what can you put on scope and make it available in the template? Here are a few examples. You can take primitive values like strings or numbers or floats. You can take objects, hashes, or arrays. You can just publish them, and this will just make them available to the template. And you can even create your custom types. So like in this case, we have an address custom type. And you can create an instance of this type, and you can just associate it with a scope, and that will make it available to the template. Now, notice that none of this is any kind of subclass or subtype of an Angular type. So we don't force you into extending our type system in order for us to be able to do mutation observation or any kind of data binding. Your model is what you make it. If you want your model to be very simple, just strings and floats, be my guest and make it that way. If you want it to be super complex, or you want to create your own type system and you want your own types and subtypes, you can do it. We don't care. As long as you publish your model on the scope by just attaching it as a property on the scope, we can bind to it, data bind to it. There are some other things that are also available on the scope, like watches and events. And I'm not going to really talk about them. I'm just mentioning that those are other things that live on the scope. The reason why you often see that there is not one but multiple scopes in an application is garbage collection. So we have a very simple application here. We have a main Chrome of the application with some menu or some links. And then we have the inner part, which is typically created by ngView. So ngView is a construct for including views for particular routes. So if you have a non-trivial application, it typically has more than one view. For example, settings, the login page, welcome page, or something like that. And typically, the Chrome is the same or very similar for all of the views. It's the middle part that changes for your application. So we can do the routing and replace the middle part through something that we call ngView directive. Now, we have something that is called the root scope, which is the main scope for the application. This is a scope that is created for your application when the application is bootstrapped. And every application, every Angular application has a root scope. Additionally, there are subscopes. And if you will see soon when Brian demonstrates his extension, we'll see how we can visualize these scopes and see where the scope boundaries in our applications are. But what is common for all applications, the scope hierarchy, as we'll see, is always bound to the DOM hierarchy. So as your DOM is nested, the scope hierarchy will follow the same nesting, but not as densely as the DOM nesting. In this case, we have one root scope for the whole application. We have one scope for the ngView part, for the middle part of the application. And then down here, there's an example of a repeater, like we've seen a list of things. And repeater will create a new scope for each of the iterations and new execution context for this iteration. Now, all of these scopes prototypically inherit from each other. So if you evaluate an expression from a nested scope, it's going to be able to see all the models that were attached to the upper scopes, the parent scopes up there. Now, why do we need this nesting? Why is it needed at all? The reason, garbage collection. When we have a simple example like this array up here, so we have a repeater with an array. Now, we add more stuff to the array. We just create a new scope, and we stamp out a new clone of the template, add it to the DOM, do all the data binding necessary, everything that is necessary. Now, let's say that something in our application causes the array to be emptied. Now we need to blow away all of the DOM nodes associated with this list, as well as all the watches, all the event listeners, everything, even the model itself. If we didn't have nested scopes, we would force you to have like a destructor or some kind of way of deregistering all the stuff that you registered with the scope. If you didn't do that, then there would be problems with memory leaks. You don't want memory leaks in larger applications. And the approach with destructors is very error prone. Like it's very easy to just forget to deregister your listener or destroy a model. With scoping, we know when the list is shrinking, and we can delete the scope, and that will just destroy all the listeners. We'll remove all the references to a model, and we'll leave entire model and all the listeners available for the garbage collector by the browser. So this is really cool, and it's not obvious why this craziness is happening, but the reason is so that it's very easy to write applications that don't have memory leaks. So let's go to the model mutation observation and see how that works. So the model mutation observation is how we figure out when the model changes, and that will then trigger updates to the view. As you've seen before, we don't have any kind of types that you need to extend, or we don't force you into using getters or setters, because these are the common ways of how you learn that the model changed. There are no other facilities in JavaScript that would tell you reliably this part of the model changed. So what we do is efficient dirty checking. Sounds crazy, but trust me, it's actually, it's not as inefficient as dirty checking sounds. The dirty checking is based on the scopes, and as I mentioned, it's nesting of scopes, and in principle or in theory, it's very similar to how lexical scoping in JavaScript works. So if you create a closure, you can think about how each closure, nested closure, sees all the stuff from the upper closure, and when the closure goes away, the garbage collection kicks in and removes all the stuff. So the whole scoping is very similar to lexical scoping in JavaScript. And it allows us to do this automatic garbage collection. So the benefits is that the data binding is very unobtrusive. If you start using getters and setters or special types that a framework forces on you, that means that your model or a big chunk of your application is polluted by all this stuff that comes with your framework. This might not sound like a big problem, but it creates problems with testability, because now you have to understand how this super type works and what you need to do to test it. It also creates problems with third-party libraries, because third-party libraries typically don't know anything about using getters and setters and using the special ways of accessing a model or mutating the model in order to make the framework aware of the changes to the model. What?
I'll allow you to repeat that on the microphone.
When you say getters and setters, do you mean like in Knockout where you have to call values like functions, or also like in Backbone?
Yes.
Or do you mean getters and setters like the new feature in JavaScript that you can make properties that automatically call getters and setters?
I mean the Backbone version and the Knockout version and Ember version.
What do you have to say about the the new JavaScript feature?
So the new JavaScript feature, it's not available everywhere where we like it to be. Hello, IE. And it's not. It doesn't span to all the areas of the language where we would need it. For example, you cannot intercept arrays and mutations to the arrays. There are many corner cases where the getters and setters that the JavaScript language provides are not sufficient for us. But I'll get to that at the very end. We are working with guys here at Google to create a spec that will allow us to do very efficient mutation observation within the browser. But I'll get to that a little later.
Can I add something to that?
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably talking about the __ define __, right?
Yeah.
Which is the way of doing the attributes. It turns out when you do that to an object, it relegates it from away from all the great optimizations that the modern JITs do, and basically puts it in this horrible space of reflective objects, which are not as fast as the other ones. And so it actually turns out that if you do use it on the browsers, it actually slows the performance. So dirty checking is actually way faster than actually defining these getters and setters. Not to mention that the getters and setters don't actually work properly in all the cases.
Cool. So another benefit of the way things work in Angular is that the data binding is very flexible, and also the mutation observation is very flexible. And this is because of the expression language that we have built in that I mentioned earlier. Another important thing is change event coalescing. So this is something that is tricky to do in Backbone, where let's say you have a list of items and you want to delete all of them. In Backbone, if you delete all of them, or if you cause a model change that will go through the array and will delete all the items, then there are all these events that fire within the framework, but it doesn't really tell you, what is the overall change. You want to know that this array got emptied, not that 100 items in this array were removed one by one. So coalescing is about how you take all these events that happen due to one model change and bundle them into one group, and then efficiently process this model mutation and push one single update into DOM. So I'll show soon in a bit how this works in Angular and how a lifecycle allows us to coalesce all the mutation events into one single DOM update, which is very efficient. And the last thing I want to mention is model consistency. If you have systems where getters and setters will fire events right away, it's very easy to observe changes to the model that are in inconsistent state. Let's take an example of a bank account. Let's say that you want to make a transfer from one account to another. So the whole action, the event of transfer is really two operations. One is take money from one account and push them to decrease the balance of one account. And the second operation is increase the balance of the second account. Now, if you start observing the changes in between these two operations, you'll see that the model is in inconsistent state. Either the old account still has the money that it shouldn't have, or the new account doesn't have the money it should have already. So in Angular, what we do is we let all the model mutation to happen, and only once all the changes to the model happened, that's when we start telling all the listeners within the system that, hey, there are these changes in the model that happened, act on them, and all these listeners will see the model in a consistent state. So how do we get from something simple as hello hero into a state where we can actually observe the model? So we have this template, and we have a scope and with the associated hero model. So we have hero with the first name Tony, and template hello, where we have expression hero dot first name. What we do is we compile this template using our compile function, compile service. We have all the services in Angular. If you don't know much about it, don't worry. If you are doing non-advanced stuff, you don't even need to know about the compile service at all. The point is that we compile the template, and what we extract is the actual expression that we need to be watching. And we create a new watch on the scope. So we have a scope, which is the context for the template, and we register this watch, and we tell, hey, this scope has some model. What I'm interested in is tell me when the value of this path, or evaluating this path within the model of the scope, changes, and call the function below. So we have a function down here. What this will do is, once the system is running, every time the hero first name changes, this function will be called and will be passed with a new value and an old value. And we can do some action. For example, DOM update in this case. So this is something that happens under the hood. If you're doing more advanced stuff, you can definitely use these APIs to observe the model mutation in your controllers or in your services. You're free to use them. But this is what is happening automatically when you just use the very basic parts of the templating language. Now the question is, so what are the parts? We have the context, which is the scope. We have the observer. This is the function that will be called during the dirty checking phase during the life cycle of the application. So before we go there, so this is the template. This is the expression, and the expression is actually passed into what we call a parse service, and the parse service will compile the expression and will return a function. So in your code, you can either use expressions, or you can actually pass in a function, and the function will be called every time we do dirty checking. The return value of the value getter function is something that Angular will remember, and next time it does dirty checking, it will compare if the value is the same, and that's how we know, oh, the model's dirty. We need to call the last part, which is the action. That make sense? Question?
So with your getter function there, actually, even before it's on the last slide, you go back real quick.
Sure.
So say that we just had hero there, and hero is this huge, complex, nested objects with objects and objects. Do you recursively go through that every time and check each one of the things against each other? Because I was working on something, and I feel like that didn't happen, or I must have run into some sort of weird case.
Very, very good question. So we don't actually care about how complex the hero object is. What we care about is just this single path in the object. So that's the only thing we are watching. When we take this expression and parse it and create a compiled version of the expression, it's actually just the getter that will just go through the model and will eventually fetch Tony in this case. And that's the only thing that we are watching. And the way this happens, we created runtime functions that are very efficient to fetch this stuff.
So if instead of hero.firstname there, we just had hero, and then we changed hero.firstname to something else, would it catch that?
It wouldn't, because
Okay.
by default, we are watching just objects and primitives by identity, not by value.
Okay, I see.
But if you are crazy enough and you're working on toy applications, it might be useful to actually watch the whole value of the object. So like recursively compare it if it changed. And you can pass additional arguments to the watch function at the end, and that will start watching the entire object. But there are memory problems with it. There are performance issues. It's nice for toy applications, but if you're building something massive, you definitely don't want to.
Right.
use it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Very good question, though.
Another question.
Are change listeners additive, meaning you can have more than one change listener?
Oh yeah, you can have as many as you want.
So you just keep adding dollar watch to the same value?
Sorry. So you can register as many watch listeners as you want. Was that a question?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can watch the same object or the same expression multiple times if you want to. You can watch different objects if you want to. It's totally up to you. Like, we don't care. So the next question is, when does our value getter function get called? How do we know that the model changed, and when do we need to do this? Because very naive implementation would be, oh, we're just going to poll all these watch functions every second or something like that to figure out what changed, and then just update the model. But that's not the best way to do it. What we have instead is something we call a $apply function. So apply function is something that tells Angular that you're about to change the model. And you can do it in two ways. You can either pass in an expression, which can mutate the model, or you can pass in a function, which will do something with the model and change it. The point is that at the end of executing this callback you pass into the apply, we do the dirt checking. And all of the APIs in Angular, so use apply to trigger dirt checking at the right time. I think I have yeah. So if you probably know a lot about the event loop and how the event loop works in the browser. So we have our native browser, and we have with the event queue, and that's where browser is spending most of the time. It's just waiting for events to happen. When an event happens, then we have JavaScript applications with some functions, and the function is a listener for particular event. So let's say that some event happens. What we do is we call, or the browser will call a function and tell, hey, this event happened. For example, XHR returned, or set timeout occurred, or something like that. The function will execute, and at the end of that, we will escape the JavaScript world. We will go back to the native world, and that's when the browser gets chance to render all the changes you made, all the manipulation you did, and just present it to the browser, to the user. And at the end of that, it's just going to go back to the event queue. It's going to check, is there anything else, any kind of other event that I need to handle? And if not, it's just going to wait there and sit until the next event occurs. So this is how it works in all the JavaScript applications.
Question over here, Igor.
Sure.
All right. Not a question.
Now you have to ask.
It was a welcome. Welcome. Okay, go.
No, he has to ask a question now.
So think of a question.
Okay, so this is how it works in the browser, and it's called event loop. In Angular applications, we of course cannot do anything different than what the browser does by default, but we can extend it. So we have the native part of the browser with the event queue where the browser is sitting all the time and waiting for something exciting to happen. We have the JavaScript world where our application lives, all of our scripts and all of the models. Everything lives there. And then we have our AngularJS application inside of this JavaScript world. So let's say that some event happens. Let's say XHR is coming back. The server replied with some data. Of course, I assume that everybody knows here that there is a lot of asynchronous stuff going on in the browser. Like very few things in the browser are synchronous. So that's why we have this event queue and this whole evented system. So event happens, the browser will call into the JavaScript, and in an Angular application, that will typically call some callback that was set by the framework or by your code, and that callback will call the apply function with some kind of handler, in this case, fn. So fn is the logic that should happen when the event happens. So in this case, the callback, the server returned with the data. Browser figured out that, hey, there's data available. I need to pass it into the application because there's the listener waiting for it. So the browser will call the listener, and the listener will call apply with another function, and that function will actually process the data that is coming from the server. Once the data is processed, the model will change because this is what the function does. The function will change the model. And at the end of the apply call, the dirty check-in is triggered. So the function is called, the dirty check-in is triggered, and now we enter something that we call a digest loop. At the beginning of the loop, there is this eval async queue that is typically empty at the beginning. Don't worry about it right now. But after the queue is checked and emptied, if there are any functions waiting there, we will go through all of the watch functions that were registered, which is all of the value getter functions, the first function that was registered with the $watch. And we will see, tell me what is the current value of the model for this given expression. So as we had the hero that first name, it's going to say, oh, it's Tony. Or maybe because of the XHR, now it's something else, it's Bob. So it's just going to retrieve the function, it's going to return to Angular. And Angular will compare the old value that it knows about from the previous run to the current value that was returned by the getter. If there is a difference, then we know that the model is dirty, and we need to execute the second part of the second callback into the watch and tell the application that the model changed and it needs to execute some changes. So anyway, we go through all of the watches that were registered through all of the scopes, so even the nested scopes, and figure out, is the model dirty? Is it not dirty? And if it is dirty, we go back and we will get back to the async queue. So an async queue is something like set timeout, but without the performance penalty of set timeout, because browsers do clamping and you cannot, even though you set timeout to 0, it's not going to be 0 milliseconds. There's a 4 milliseconds delay, I think, in Chrome. But what is even worse is that if you use a timeout, the browser will do rendering between when you register the set timeout call and when the set timeout callback will actually execute. And this rendering in between causes flicker in the application, which is very, very bad, which creates a bad user experience. So we want to avoid that. So that's why we created this eval async queue, and within Angular, you can just put stuff into this eval async queue, and you get away with all the problems with the set timeout. Anyway, so there's this loop. We're just going to keep on evaluating it until the model stabilizes. What I mean by stable model is when there are no watches that say that the model is dirty. So when there are no watches that the model is dirty, we can exit. And we exit back to the native world of the browser, and we will let the DOM to render. And this is when the when the browser will do all of the heavy work of rendering whatever you did and presenting it to the user. And after that, it will enter the event queue, and it's going to wait there. So the reason why this is important to understand is when you're debugging or when you're working with Angular applications, people often forget to use the apply call if they are using APIs outside of Angular. And if you forget to use apply calls, nothing in the view happens. Like you change the model, and now you expect that it should update the view. But Angular is not polling. It's not trying to figure out when you change the model. You have to tell it that the model changed and needs to do the dirty checking. So if you see that the model is not applying, not being pushed into the view, then you are either not using Angular APIs that use apply internally and do all the dirty checking, or you are doing something that we don't support out of the box. For example, WebSockets. WebSockets are asynchronous, and you need to kick Angular and tell, hey, go dirty check and push everything to the view. So that's how the apply works. And the last thing that I want to mention here is that even though the dirty checking is quite efficient today, we think that as the applications are going to get larger and larger, we will eventually see performance issues, and we want to have a plan for that. And our plan for that is improve the browser, create APIs in the browser that will help us to do this unobtrusive data binding and mutation observation natively in the browser, because that's the most efficient way that this can happen. And we're working with a team here at Google who's working on something called model-driven views. That's a specification for the browser, for HTML, that if everything goes well, will be implemented in all of the browsers. And all the browsers will then have native facilities to do data binding and mutation observation in a very unobtrusive way. So this is still far away, and it's going to take some time to get there, but steady progress going on, so hopefully. And just to compare the Angular and the model-driven views, everything in Angular is JavaScript. So while the model-driven stuff is going to be native, and Angular is available obviously now, and you can use it now. While the model-driven views, it's still going to take time to get there. That's about it. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, question in Seattle. Looks like.
Sure.
Questions from Seattle. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. Part of it applies to your previous presentation at the meetup before. I think you were the one that were the presenter. It was on YouTube. Is that you?
Yeah.
Okay. During that presentation, you said that even a manager could do a project with this, if I recall correctly.
We have proof. I am that idiot manager who wrote.
No, not idiot, but.
Oh, well, very kind. Anyway, yes, please go on. Maybe I can answer this question.
Yeah.
Okay. From everything I've seen on the site and so forth, I haven't done any coding yet with this, so I have to admit some ignorance. I didn't see any library of objects or any IDE references or any visual tools that many of these managers might like to have if they're going to do this development. What's the status of those things? Or what was it you had in mind for a manager?
Very good question. There are several parts to answering this question. One is, because of the templating is an extension of HTML, you can actually use existing tools today. So you can, if you have a good HTML editor or some WYSIWYG editor, you can use that to create most of the Angular application, because it's really just HTML that is extended with some extra tags that declaratively specify the dynamic behavior of the application at runtime. And the second part to the answer is that we are working on tools for debugging and visualizing what the application looks like once it's bootstrapped. And this is something that Brian is going to show off in a bit.
And while it doesn't sound like what you're asking for is what Igor exactly said. Like, what sounds like you're looking for a drag and drop tool for putting apps together. It's not quite what Igor meant when he said even
right.
idiot managers could do it. But you know, idiot managers know a little bit of JavaScript and they know HTML. Like, yeah, we can do stuff. There are several IDE solutions that exist that know about Angular syntax and can help you along. Right. One for WebStorm and one for NetBeans, I believe.
Right. So.
And TextMate, yes. Yes. If you get that comes along for free.
But all of these are really helping you to write the code. They're not trying to be the drag and drop solution. So they will help you autocomplete stuff and give you help within the editor. But we are not trying to solve the world, solve all the problems of the world by creating, drag and drop editor, which will just automatically create a cool application.
Okay, so let's continue down this path a little bit.
Okay.
Managers that I have been working with are jumping all over HTML5, which has a whole lot of little object models and so forth out there. Where do you think this can fit in for those kinds of managers?
So HTML5 is really awesome because it adds new capabilities to the browser, but it doesn't help you build the applications in a simpler way. So it doesn't it doesn't give you a new abstraction layer through which you can build applications. So if you are familiar with building applications without data binding, there is a whole lot of boilerplate you have to write. And the way you think about structuring the application is very different. With Angular, because we add data binding to the browser, you start thinking about different ways about your application. You start focusing more about the business logic and how the application should happen to the user input, rather than how you need to figure out what changed in the application, how to get hold of the right DOM node in the DOM and update it with the right value. So the thinking is very simplified and more focused on the business problem that the application is trying to solve.
Now, we actually will use HTML5 constructs where available. So if you're using a modern browser, Angular will take advantage of services and things that are available in HTML5. So one of the nice things is you can write Angular JS apps and not have to worry so much about which type of browser we're in.
Right. So there are many really cool features in HTML5 that we want to use today, but it's hard to use them because they're not available in all the browsers that are still in use today. So what we do in Angular is we use these native capabilities and native APIs when possible, and we polyfill with our own implementation or third-party implementation where the browser doesn't have a certain capability. So this is a good example is the location service, so an history API. So HTML5 adds history APIs for pushing state and popping state, which allows you to get rid of the hash bang URLs that many of the HTML applications are so infamous for. But it's really nice to use this feature, but you can't do it unless you also have a solution for old browsers that don't have this API. And we have a way of polyfilling and making sure that the application can utilize these APIs and still work in all browsers.
And just back to Igor's presentation, I'm not sure if it was clear, but a lot of the bits Igor went over today are the inner workings. So we're trying to answer the question about how does this all work.
Yeah.
Most of what he talked about with apply and watch and knowing the event cycle, You never actually have to know to write an Angular app.
Right. So this was really a deep dive into how it all works and how what you need to know once you get your hands really dirty with Angular and you're starting building a bigger application. If you're just using simple binding and your application is simple, like you don't even need to know about any of the services that we have internally and that you can use if you want to, but you don't have to.
Great question. How about take one over here? I'll run the microphone up to you.
Hi, I've worked in languages which are event-driven, and I was wondering if you'd considered sort of moving some of the event-driven kind of stuff you're doing down into like virtual machine layer so you can get it cross-language to work with Java and other things.
Virtual machine, like V8?
But you're writing reactive code where you're looking for things to change and then you do something. It seems like you could shove that down into a virtual machine layer, and as long as you know the name of something, you can say, I'd like to watch that thing.
So this is part of the native APIs that we would like to have in the browser, but with anything like this, you have to go through the standardization process and figure out what is acceptable for all the browser vendors. So while I would love to have a native way of observing all these models, it's going to take a while to get there.
Just from a performance perspective, it seems like that
definitely.
would be the way to go.
The performance would be much better if all this stuff was happening natively. But I'm not willing to wait 5 years to have all these native APIs. Like, I'd rather do something that is not as fast as the native version, but still will give me the APIs that I want.
So yes,
Yes.
we would like it to be part of the browser, and we're working with the browser folks.
And
to make
not
it happen.
just browser, like this stuff would be useful even on the server side. So.
Good point. Do we have another Seattle question? No, not yet. Okay, we'll take another one over here.
Oh,
Okay, one over here, and then we'll go back to Seattle.
sounds good.
So I haven't done any coding with AngularJS yet, but I've seen one of the examples. It can wire a backend to it. So how does the data bind would help with all this data synchronization between the backend you wire and your front-end application?
Right. So it removes a lot of the boilerplate from the application because, again, you are dealing just with your model. So the server will send, here is the model, here is the current list of users or whatever the model is. What you need to do is just expose this model onto the scope. And if your templates are referring to the structure, to the path for this user list, for example, then the mutation observation within Angular will see, originally, before the request was made, I had this template with the repeater, but the people list was empty, so I didn't render any kind of users. But now the XHR came back, and the model is now part of my application. It was exposed on the scope. The repeater now actually returns sees a array that contains a list of users, and then the data binding will kick in and will take the template, will multiply it as many times as necessary, and data bind it. So you get to write a lot less code, and you really care about what the model looks like and how to update the model, and let the presentation layer just observe all these changes and do all the manipulation necessary to reflect the changes.
I will think more about the two-way data binding in this case.
Oh,
so
okay. So with two-way data binding, you can send the updates to the server as they're happening. And there are some projects, I forget, what was the application, the guy, they have this crazy database on the server side. No, Meteor. There was, no. I don't know, I forget. No, none of these. It was something else. So, it doesn't matter. That thing with the stuff. Yeah, the thing with the stuff. It doesn't matter. So typically you don't push the updates as user types because it's not necessary. It's not typically what you want. But you can do it if you want to. Like you can be notified of all these changes and push the updates to the server. We don't have a full stack story as Meteor, where the model and the server, they all connected and they know about each other, and the changes propagate to the server transparently. We are trying to focus on the client side right now and just make sure that we can work with any kind of backend you might have, because the applications we are targeting are the CRUD applications, applications where you have some kind of database and you want to make this database available to users through the web browser. So what you typically do is you just pull data from the database, you display it, you have a form, you change the form, you hit the save button, and you push the data back to the database. So this is the main use case for Angular, and this is what we are focusing on. And we are trying to be compatible with as many backend solutions as possible. We don't want to force people into, this is the backend you have to use with front end, because in large companies, it's kind of hard to make such a decision and just consolidate on both front end and back end at the same time.
So it's like basically you just provide the hooks for...
Yeah, there are hooks. So if you want to send the updates to the server as the user types, you can do it.
Thank you.
Seattle question.
Hey, how's it going? Thank you for an excellent talk, by the way. To go back a little bit to the apply function, and to bring that back to an example you gave of, for example, deleting all the items in a given collection. You're saying with Angular that if you do delete all the items in a collection, that events won't fire on each delete to update the model, and instead it's going to fire once at the end. First of all, is that correct? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so you will be notified of, depending on what your watch is set up or how you set up your watch, if you set up a watch at all, then you will be notified of the change to the array once. And in Angular, if you're just using the ng-repeat construct, what this means is that we will observe the complete the emptying of the array at once, and once the whole model mutation is completed, that's when we exit the we exit the JavaScript world and we let the browser render. Does it make sense?
It does. So does apply get called automatically, or is that something we have to call at the end of processing?
So apply is usually called by the framework for you. So if you are using our HTTP service to fetch data from the server, or if you're using our timeout service to register set timeout callbacks, or if there are any other kind of event listeners that end up sitting in the event queue and waiting for the event to happen, then we wrap your code into the apply call so that the dirt checking happens automatically for you. But if you are not using our APIs for things like WebSockets, like right now we don't have an out-of-box implementation or any kind of API for WebSockets, then every time you are outside of the AngularJS world, then you need to call the apply to tell Angular, hey, this event happened, it changed the model, go figure out what changed and push it to the view.
That's exactly what I was asking. Thank you very much.
Perfect, thank you.
Great. Question over here.
So one possible way around the performance issue, if you had 1,000 expressions listed or something, is when you call apply, couldn't we say what subset matters in that case or something like that, just to...
That's a very good question, and we did consider doing like partial dirt checking of the whole model. You can do it if you want to. There is apply call, but there is also digest call. Every scope has a method called digest, and if you call that method, it will do the dirt checking only for the particular scope. So if you are doing something advanced and you are 100% sure that the watches in your scope are not going to change anything in the parent scope, then you can just trigger partial dirt checking in your application. And there are large applications here at Google that do that in very specific cases. But typically it's not needed. Only if you, in very, very specific cases, you can do it. I think we have a question in Seattle.
Okay, let's continue on down this path with the client-based front-end design tool here. How does Angular wrap its arms around an existing server-based database? Is there any sample code out on the Angular site for this?
So as I said, we are trying to be a client-side solution for as many backend solutions as possible. So we don't tell you, you have to do this on your server side. There are APIs in the browser, like XML HTTP request object, that allow you to communicate from the browser to the server and do basically HTTP requests. There is also a WebSocket API, which is the same thing, but more efficient and is better suited in some cases. So there are ways in the browser how you can call to the server, and we just utilize these channels to talk to the server. But on the server side, it's really up to you to figure out how you want, what your database is like, what the schema is like, how you want to access this database. If you want to create a Rails backend, you can. If you want to create a Java backend, you can. If you want to have a PHP or any kind of other backend, you can do that too. If you want to use a third-party solution like Firebase or any parse, and like there are many other databases that are provided as a cloud service these days, you can use those too. Like, we don't really care. We want to be the front-end solution.
So maybe one more question, and let's take a 5-minute break before Brian gets going with his presentation. Ed, down in front here.
Yeah, I've started using Go for my backend, and it had, and it already has some stuff built in for templates and libraries and stuff. How would I, or use Angular for the front end? Is there some hints or something? Does Go have something, libraries that have been built for to help interface better there?
I don't know much about the Go integration and what kind of templating they have, but again, we get into similar question that somebody else asked. What if I want to combine the server-side templating and the client-side templating? And my answer is try to avoid it because it's a really messy solution. There are many issues.
But I don't think that's the question he's asking.
But
so what would you write on the back end in Go or any server?
Well, you typically write the code that does the authentication for your user, the authorization. So you make sure that whatever is coming from the browser is accessing data that given user that is authenticated has permissions to access. And then you do the data access and the whole retrieving the data and persisting the data.
So typically you'd create something that's, you could, like a RESTful data service where you can submit JSON and get JSON back. That's what you write for an Angular backend. And again, you can do that in anything. You can do it in
PHP. It doesn't have to be JSON, but like JSON is the most natural format to use, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, but that's kind of the easy route. Yeah. And in most most server-side solutions, there are already sort of pre-built libraries. In Java, there's a great thing called RESTlet. In everything, every server. I'm not sure about Go. I'm embarrassed. I don't know. But yeah, every server solution has something like that where you can give a data API that the front end can consume.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then Brian is going to show us some really cool.
We had one more question from Seattle. Would that be possible?
Sure. Okay, one more question from Seattle.
Okay. When dealing with scopes, what's the typical granularity of these? Would you have a scope per every option in a select, for example? Or do you tend to make them bigger? And also, in a previous slide, you had $scope.$apply. And how do you know which scope to call apply on?
So apply will, I'll take the second question first. Apply will trigger digest, and dirt checking on all scopes, starting from the root scope, no matter on which scope you call it. This is because we cannot be certain that you are not modifying the model in the upper scopes. So we are just dirt checking the entire system to figure out what changed. Again, it's not as bad as it sounds. Like, trust me. we have performance tests where we create 10,000 tests, 10,000 scopes that are wildly nested, and this is what we benchmark with, and like we can dirt check the system very quickly in a matter of dozens of milliseconds. And the first question was, sorry, what was the first question? Hello?
Can you ask the first question again?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Try.
Okay, sorry, the mic cut out. How granular do scopes get? I mean, I think you kind of answered my question, but
Right.
you know, would you have a separate scope for each row in a select, for example?
So you typically, unless you're doing something advanced, like creating your own compiler directives, you don't get to create scopes. This is handled by the framework for you. And the way it works is we go through the template, and in the template we find these directives like ng-repeat or other directives. And these directives will either ask for the scope to be created for them by the compiler, or they will create the scope internally in the directive code. So the granularity of the scope is it really depends on what you're trying to do. If you're using ng-repeats a lot, then you're going to have a lot of scopes, one scope per each repetition. And if you're using ng-view, you're going to have one scope for the entire ng-view. But the granularity is much it's not as fine as with DOM nodes. I cannot really give you specific numbers because it depends on how your template is structured. But typical application would have a small application would have like maybe 10 scopes, bigger application maybe 200 scopes. If you're doing something crazy, you can have 2,000, 3,000 scopes.
Okay, thank you.
More time for questions later, and Vojta's up in Seattle during the break, and we're down here during the break.
Yeah, also feel free to ask Vojta questions in Seattle. That way we can address more questions in parallel. But I'll be happy to take more questions at the end.
Great. Come back in 5? Literally 5.
Reuse those controllers on the server side if you want to do headless operations?
You could.
Just Node.js?
Yeah. So there are.
That's the good thing about the Angular controllers is like they shouldn't have much Angular in them.
Right. Right. So everything is just JavaScript. So you can definitely run it in Node. And
There's a difference between can and should.
exactly. So should you reuse the code? We don't have too many use cases. Like Angular doesn't have a backend story yet. We are thinking about how we could.
Could you turn off your mic?
And then we could reuse the client-side code on the server to prevent the pages.
Can you guys turn off your mic? Thank you.
We could reuse the client-side code on the server side to prevent the pages, but this is not finished yet. Like we are thinking about how this could work, and it's going to take months to get there. But what I heard just recently from somebody not related to Angular was that they were building a JavaScript application both on the server and the client side, and they found out that there was very little they could reuse between the server and the client. And that's because what you do on the client side is typically very different from what you do on the server side. So even like this person was really surprised that there was very little he could reuse.
Yeah, it's probably going to turn out that way, except there's things like, uploading and like converting CSVs. Sometimes you'd want to do that as a client, sometimes as a server.
Right. Brian, you can sit up.
Sure, sure.
So
that was good. She's got awesome exposure. You also put yourself on the radar when you go in.
we remember this. And the next time that is full, we get or return value. We compare the last one if it changed, then we know and we have other parts of the system that that's when they started all of the watches that
So I'm back and wrapping up. Allocator,
But because that's not really so you can have thousands and thousands of watches and still do dirt checking in the system under 30 So the trick is, how do you design any check? That doesn't happen all the time. So most of the time you're sitting in the field, you're waiting for it.
Before a demo? Are you joking me? Do you know how many experimental APIs this thing uses? Like the second I press that little it'll break. I'm sure of it. It happened this morning. Makes things interesting. It's nice because I can talk to it for APIs, but it's also it's bleeding edge for a reason. I know, I want to see it myself.
Just copy over it that way. The data structure is not so much packed. We're using cost centers, smart. So it's
like the internal for like I like that model of you just attach a property to a spine. Oh yeah. Like everything that I've been doing so far is like really non-standard because there's all sorts of like weird shit building it out there to communicate through like different contexts for each solution. But like once I do all of that, like this is actually my extension is actually built. So like the data binding inside of my extension is what it is. So I made a I put like my Django templating stuff in there and add like the application and we just put in like every script just like var stuff equals do search files and stuff. And so I have like include the Angular and I just make sure that I don't do any like actual Angular data binding. It's gonna be like a meme. I'm waiting to ask how I write this out. And there are benefits to having only static code. Because then I get my Facebook killer. So then your page is bad. And eventually that's like a logical extreme conclusion. Or he'll get to a point and be like, here, you should send this DNA disclosure because I want you to write my app for me. I'm gonna be sad. This is not that kind of talk. Yeah, I think you're looking for this I'm good whenever. I've been ready since like.
All right, folks, please, let's get sad again. Folks in Seattle, please get yourselves sad again. Maybe you're all mobbing Vojta. Especially you, Igor, get sad. Okay, we're going to have Brian, our newest member, matter of fact, an intern on our project, has been working on a cool Chrome plugin for inspecting your application to figure out what's going on. Brian, please take it away.
Right. So just before Brian starts, this is an extension that we've been working on for the past 2 weeks or so. Brian has done most of the work, really excellent stuff. It's still in early stages. This is going to be like a preview of what we are intending to do. You can definitely play with the extension, but don't expect to be able to debug very complex applications just yet. But we are very happy to get any kind of early feedback, and you can help to steer the direction of the project, because I think this is going to be really awesome in understanding what the application looks like at runtime and help you understand why certain things are not working the way you thought they should. But Brian?
Sure. Am I gonna mic up or?
No, you can use that.
Yeah, Seattle, can you hear me? Arms, hands waving or something? All right, cool. All right. Sure. So like Igor said, I'm Brian. I'm interning on the Angular team this summer, and so in about 4 weeks, this is my progress so far on the debugger for Angular. Well, this isn't. This is a demo app. So some of you might notice this as the to-do app on the Angular homepage, which is exactly what it is. But let's see what it looks like here in the debugger. Right. So the debugger hooks right into the Chrome Web Inspector. So the Web Inspector gives you a lot of cool things out of the box, but we have this Angular tab here as well. So you'll see there's model tab, performance options. So this model tree it illustrates the scope and then all of the different models, which are just properties of the scope. You can, in simple cases right now, this is just a JSON dump, but it doesn't have two-way binding, right? So you can change this, and there, it changed, right? So, that's it's pretty basic feature, but I would assume that this would come in handy in a lot of debugging situations. So further down here, you see to-dos is an array, right? I don't know if you guys can see that. That's a square brace there. So that's an array. It lists all the things in there in JSON. And then you can see here, because we're using ngRepeat, if we look at the scope, or if we look at the source here, right? So we're using an ngRepeat here. So like Igor said, ngRepeat creates a scope for each of the items that it's iterating through. So here you can see, here's one of them that's, learn Angular. Here's another that's build an Angular app. I added another item, I didn't add another item. So if we had another item in here, like Igor said, again, this is, it's not reflected in here, but it's coming soon. So continuing onward, you can visualize the scopes. This gives you nice outlines around them. So blue is for a binding, red is for each of the scopes. So here you can visually see, these scopes are being created. And this combined with the model view can be really helpful if you have some scope hierarchy and you're not sure where something is going amiss. So let's come over here. All right, so we have a to-do controller. So I mean, this is right off the home page. So there's an add to-do function, remaining function, archive function, and then obviously you have the model here as well as another model for the list name. But let's say you write some super controller that's that wraps your entire app, right? So let's say that this also has a property list name. So you might run into a case, not to do. You might run into a case where there's some confusion over, is this the child scope or is this the parent scope? Here, in order to actually make this the parent scope, we'll just put that controller on the body. What would I call it? Super controller, right? So if we come back over here, we have to refresh this, obviously. So now you see here, this is the not to do list name on the super scope, and here's the list name on the scope that we had before. So one of the other cool things that we have in this tree is you can click on this, and it'll take you into Chrome's inspector here. So you can see, here's my super controller, here's my to-do controller. And then on the side as well, right, so this gives you everything in the scope. The $ prefixed properties are internal Angular things. But down here you'll see list name, which is ours. You can come over here, and let's look at the list name here. Right. So this I foresee being helpful in a lot of cases where you're building up these hierarchies. You want to see where is this value coming from? Why isn't it what I want it to be? And just visualize as well your app. All right, so that's interesting, but probably for larger apps, a big part of developing them is going to be addressing performance issues. So to that end, there's another tab in here, performance. So performance, you need to enable it separately, and this is because it injects a little bit of code into the Angular framework that tracks each of the watchers, tracks these different watcher getters, or I'm not sure what terminology we're using for that, but tracks these different things and really helps you narrow down what are the things that I need to optimize, so you're not just kind of wildly editing code and you're not sure what effect that has on your performance. So here we can see much like the model tree. We've got the different scopes. Then this shows you the different listeners. So we've got a list name here, right? And that corresponds in the code down to, where is it? Here it is, list name, right? So that's cool. But then down here we have kind of a histogram or a graph, if you will, of the different expressions and what percentage of the time, as well as how long does it take each of these to run. And this updates as you update the app. It's possibly a little bit difficult to see with the resolution on this thing, but let's try. So we create some other thing, right? And so you see a lot of time is being spent in the repeat directive expression. This is an internal Angular function. And what this does is it does the dirty checking on an ng repeat. So there's obviously a lot going on in there. But if you had two-way data binding on this text, maybe this text was editable, then you would see the usage for this go up. And we can do a quick thing here just to show it. So I wrote some cool filters here. I don't know if everyone in the audience is up on their state-of-the-art sorting algorithm, but this is BogOSort. The way that this works is it actually randomly sorts some array of something and then checks if it's right. If it's not right, then it repeats the process. So it's a very, very bad, inefficient function, but it's really good for demoing things. Yeah. So let's come in here to our repeater. If I can find it. Oh, there it is. Right, and so we'll add this filter to it, right? Logos sort. Right. So this will sort it in a not very fast way. Right. So you notice ng repeat directive expression. The usage for this comes up, and the reason for that is because this ng repeat kind of encapsulates right now the filters. Something down the road that we'd like to see is, a drill down then even, of what's going on in here, what helper functions are being called, what filters are being called, all those sort of things. But again, this is a few weeks of work, so there's still a lot to do. Right? So, as you add more items, you can see, some of these other things start to come into play. So this helps with, what's keeping my application from loading initially, and then, is my application being sluggish? What are the different trade-offs? But let's see if we can, if we can affect one of these other listener or watch expressions or what have you. Let's see if we can affect one of those by putting a filter on it. So let's see, here we go. So I wrote a wrapper at least around some guy's leet function here. So what this does is it does a bunch of regex replaces on text to make it leet, which if you don't know, it's kind of a internet slang thing. So you replace A with a number 4, you replace B with an 8, and so on. It's that way the glyphs kind of match up, but it's kind of hard to read. So let's use this filter on, let's say, the text here. All right. So this will make our awesome to-do list. There we go. Build an Angular app. Learn Angular. All right. So let's see. List name, where is it? Oh, here it is, right? So you see that the usage for this jumped up a lot. And the reason for that is because you're doing a lot of these expensive regex operations. In fact, let's see if we can. Here we go. So yeah, we're doing somewhere in the order of like 70 regex things in there. So yeah, again, not the most efficient thing, but very good for demos like this. But I mean, we can even take it a little bit further and put another filter on there, like for instance, uppercase. All right, so this is, did I do this right? Oh, okay. That's actually impressive that this even sorts. Yeah, thanks for whoever pointed that out. They should get like a t-shirt or something. All right, anyway, yeah, good catch. So there we go. All right, so yeah, now you see this jumped up. I mean, it was like 33 before. Right, and as we add more things, you see, this took 5 seconds. Yeah, sorry, 5 mil. Sorry. Anyway, you already got a t-shirt. All right. So yeah, you can see how this will help you. I mean, at least in the simple case, learn not to do silly things like this on your to-do list. But hopefully, in bigger apps, it'll give you some direction as to which filters are slow, which directives are slow. Which areas do I need to optimize, as opposed to just kind of shooting blindly in the dark. And I think that's about it. Does anyone have any questions on this? Anything you'd like to see?
Can I find this project to check it out for myself?
There will be a blog post in the near future.
But
probably
wait, what
today, tomorrow,
tonight?
If you want it right now, like right this very second.
Right now.
Right now. All right. So I'm BT Ford on GitHub. All right. So you'll check out my fork of AngularJS, and I have a branch in there called extension. So you'll load the extension. I think you have to enable like a developer mode in Google Chrome. You might also have to use Canary with like experimental DevTools API flag turned on. Yeah, this is really cutting edge stuff. Okay. And also, well, yeah. Another thing
wait,
is, I don't know if you
I'll
guys
wait.
noticed,
Never
but
mind.
yeah,
Never
this. I'm probably like an update away from it breaking here too. So yeah, there'll be a blog post. But yeah, if you really want it, it's on GitHub under a branch under my fork of AngularJS. And on GitHub I'm BT Ford, F-O-R-D, BT F-O-R-D. All right.
Bravo Tango.
Yeah, exactly.
Foxtrot.
So do
yeah,
you
and-
guys have any questions or any ideas of what would you like to see in this extension? What is the hard part that makes it difficult for you to work with Angular? What is something that is not obvious and maybe the extension could help you with?
Well, this is a great start. I wanted to applaud. What I think I would like to see is, I don't know what your future plans are, but to have like the testacular or whatever baked into this, so you could kind of run test scripts against what you have in there, against the controller, and modify the testing, if that's possible.
Yeah, it's something definitely worth looking into.
But hand that back to Dean.
So right now we are really focusing on giving more visibility into the runtime of the application, giving more visibility into test runs and that kind of stuff is not what we are primarily focusing on, but maybe we can see, how we could get that bundled with this, but more thinking to be done.
I think the have the most problems with trying to debug is directives.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I get decent stack traces on directives, and might have also had problems on watch, but that's because I always end up firing them recursively. But I'm pretty sure there isn't a good way to debug directives right now, and it would be a little bit nicer to get deeper introspection, just like you're trying to work on filters too.
Yeah. So have you used like some of the setting breakpoints, doing stuff in Chrome's vanilla dev tools?
Well, yeah, I do step through the code, but occasionally it's like when it first breaks or something like that, and it just says I don't know. I can stick to stepping through it, but sometimes it's like at my first glance when something first breaks, I have no idea where in the directive or what the directive was trying to do.
Yeah, sure.
Good suggestion. Brian will think of that. Do we have questions in Seattle? No, I see no hands waving, so I'll go to one over here.
Hey, I don't have
Oh,
questions.
wait, go ahead. Sorry.
Brian, you're awesome. It's great. I'm really impressed.
Wait,
it's cool.
That sounds like a... Oh, Vojta.
Thanks,
I want to
Vojta.
second that from someone who's not a member of your team. I'm an SET in Kirkland, and this is awesome, and I want it as soon as possible.
Yay.
All right, thank you, appreciative person.
Okay, let's go to a question, but more praise, please.
So can we see the information about dirty check? So how many times he called and how long does it take? How many watcher list?
Yes, we can see that. Actually, yeah, that's something that I forgot to show. Yeah, we do have that right now. So
also a plant in the audience, obviously.
Yeah. So we have an option here to log to the console for apply. Oops, this is the wrong thing. There we go. That's what I was trying to click. All right. So if we go back over to this, you can see what happens in this apply call, right? And this is being cut off. But here you can see timing information. Obviously, it would be nice to to have even more information, or maybe a more verbose mode. But in the few weeks I've been working on this, this is as far as I've gotten. What besides just a number for time, are there any other specific metrics that you think you'd be interested in?
I want to see the watcher list. So how many watchers, listeners I have, and then how long does it take to, how many times my watcher called, my listener called.
I see. So the number of calls as well. So not just a number, but this specific watcher is called, X times. And...
Yeah, kind of.
All right. Yeah, definitely something that I'll be working on. I'm not sure exactly the form that it'll take because there's a lot of ways to correlate, this performance metric versus this, and we're still working on right now. What's meaningful for small apps, what's meaningful for big apps. But we definitely, any input that you have is very valuable. So thank you.
More questions? We'll go to one more up here, and if Seattle has one, wave your hand so I can see you.
It may actually be on there, but does that also show functions that are on the scope, or is it only attributes?
So right now, I think you're talking about in this model thing over here.
Yeah, in the model thing.
Yeah, so it does, but I mean, I don't have any meaningful data to display over here. It would be cool if I could like hot patch these functions.
Yeah, or
Maybe.
have a way to invoke them and pass arguments in so you can see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely something that I'll take a look at.
Great idea. What else? Oh, I think I saw one down here. Was there? Did I miss it? Oh, over there. Sorry. No intercept.
Is there a way to get a handle of the services?
A handle of the services,
So,
meaning.
for example, $HTTP or.
Right now, no, but it is definitely possible for me to write something like that. I'm not sure if I took this out. For a while, I had something where you could do, so you have, sorry, that's the wrong tab. All right, so you have, your element here, you have, the scope information here. I had it where, for those of you who use the web inspector, the $0, right? So this shows this. I had for a while a $sign scope. Oh, maybe it's still there. So this might also answer the question of, can I, just invoke some random thing in here? So let's see, actually, does this even work? Add to do. So I think add to do assumes that there's already something typed in here, but let's try it. Does this actually work? No, it doesn't actually work. All right, so anyway. Yes, that's probably true. So yeah, if I do a scope.apply, $apply, you guys are good. All right, so, oh, that's interesting. All right, so yeah, there we go. All right, so, so yeah, you can kind of do that right now. But yeah, obviously it'd be nice if you just, you call your function, and it does the apply for you. You don't have to.
Well, it would be nice to have the other services aside from scope.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And
So
custom ones too.
You can actually get references to those very easily. It's just not built into the.
yeah, if you just do an Angular module, can you
No,
do that?
You want go on the root element and just do $injector. So just like you get scope.
No. This is the root scope.
No, your root element. So or any kind of element. So you want this.
How many engineers does it take?
Seattle
to get an
suggests
injector?
getting control of the injector? Or getting a hold of the injector?
Yeah.
No dollar.
Okay, so I have the injector. Now I can do get $HTTP. And I get the reference to this. So now you have the reference to the HTTP service, the instance that the application is actually using, and you can call them. You can call methods and stuff.
Yeah.
You printed the string of the body of the function.
Yeah, but I mean, we could add a nice interface like dollar module or whatever that gives you that without having to do that long function call into into Angular's methods.
All right, so in my app, I deal a lot with promises for remote data that then ends up delaying the rendering, and it's not always clear like when Angular is going to decide not to render stuff or not. I don't know, but so it would be nice to have some more visibility into that about like how long promises are taking to resolve, and whether or not certain parts of the rendering are being delayed because of promises coming in. So
I see. So to me, this sounds more like something that you could possibly even get at right now, just in the timeline, because this is your own promise, right?
Yeah.
That's taking the time. So you can inspect that here in the timeline. This actually gives you some cool stuff. So you can record things here. This will give you transfers to the server, things like that. So you can see some of that stuff there. That might already help you a little bit.
So
I'm not sure how much I can do as far as things outside of Angular because
that's not what I'm talking about. I
Okay,
mean,
sure.
I'm referring specifically to when Angular renders things. So, I mean, I can already look at my network requests,
Okay. So yeah, that's another thing that's coming. So right now I'm showing you kind of like the first half of the watch. Like this is we're checking, we're doing dirty checking, right? So
Mhm.
you're saying I want to also profile the second half. So after you've done the dirty checking, now how long does it take you to do all of those mutations in the DOM?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also in just even
Yes,
seeing
for sure, we
like,
definitely,
what gets repainted would be good, or
Mhm.
re-rendered.
So like a list of here's X DOMs that were
Mhm.
mutated in this loop,
Yeah.
apply or whatever. Yeah. All right, sure. So
we're actually looking at the possibilities of hooking into the timeline of the DevTools and displaying the apply events and the watch execution. So you could actually graph the whole thing, not just the DOM manipulation, the XHR, but also the events that happen internally in Angular. But it seems that right now there are the APIs that the timeline exposes are not sufficient for doing anything sophisticated. But we're talking to the right guys and hopefully can get them into giving us the APIs to be able to look into it. Because that would be really cool. Like then you could see the whole stack and internals, Angular stuff as well as the manipulation.
yeah, and something that I looked at, Chrome actually lets you specify via like a command line arg what your own version.
I'm sorry,
of the
could you
dev
repeat
key.
the question?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Could you repeat the question? We didn't get that over here.
We didn't hear anything he just said, or they didn't.
Oh, okay, I see.
Seattle, they didn't hear his comment.
I see.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, my mic was off. So what I was saying is that we are looking into being able to hook into the timeline and be able to graph all the internal Angular events within the timeline, within the Web Inspector timeline. So that way you'll be able to see XHR coming from the server, browser calling the listener, that triggering apply, and now apply and triggering all these watch functions, and after that, all the manipulation that happens, followed by all the rendering that the browser has to do. So you get to see the whole stack in one graph. And we are looking into if this is possible. Right now, it seems that the APIs that the timeline exposes are not sufficient for doing anything sophisticated like this. But we're talking to the right people, and we'll see if it's possible to extend the APIs and give us more hooks into the timeline so that we can show you more.
You get that? All right. Yeah. So I was just saying that Chrome actually does let you, specify like a directory that is your own version of the command line tools. You can actually just download somewhere on the Chrome dev site, and it's all just HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So I mean, worst case we could fork that, but it would be really nice just to expose those APIs through Chrome. Through the web inspector that comes with Chrome, rather than add another step to that already long list of things that you need to do to get this working.
More questions? I guess we're wrapping it up. Do we have more stuff? Or
Yeah. So
A
Nick
question from
here
Seattle?
wanted to.
Oh, Seattle. Okay, go ahead.
Is there any chance that we would be able to get something like this in Firefox or other browsers?
I figured that this would come up. I don't have any plans to yet, but if you are noisy about it, then we'll see. So I mean, a lot of this is driven by community feedback, and if the community says we want a Firefox plugin too, then maybe it'll happen.
How about IE?
No. I would find a new community.
Okay, so Thanks, Brian. Nick wanted to show off his application that he's working on, so we can do it briefly. And then I want to briefly show you the application that we've been working on here at Google that finally launched last week. And that will be it. Then we can just hang out here and just talk about Angular, and you can come to us and ask questions, and we'll be happy to answer anything one-on-one.
Do you want to go first?
Or
Nick? Here. 1, 2.
Click it on. Okay. Does this work? Yeah. Awesome. All right. So. Oh, so it's on this side, I think. Is it? Oh, right. It is on that side. Okay. All right. So this is just a hobby app that I've been working on. I actually use Angular at work, but I don't know. You guys can check out that production app whenever, which is at portal.bitcasa.com. But this one, you know, you need to have your own data to play with it. So, but you know, that's our product. It's kind of like, you know, it's a cloud storage thing. That's pretty cool. Well, this is so small that it's gonna mess everything up. So, oh, cool. Well, anyway, so this thing, it's gonna look a little bad because I just had to like make it tiny to fit on this screen. But this is a thing I've been working on. It's a visual programming language, and I originally implemented it in like 3JS, but decided to do the actual rendering part in Angular because, you know, then I could have the flexibility of having HTML parts, which is on top of a canvas for all the little line drawing and stuff. So as you can see, we've got a sort of a graph here, and it's connecting the lines, and it's kind of cool. You can drag stuff around, and you can like grab little nibs and connect them to each other. Wow, when I changed the size of this layout, it messed up my math, but it will still know where the nib is when I let it go. Anyway, and these things I have like shrinky inputs and whatever. I'm just sort of showing off the UI parts of it because that's what's relevant to Angular people, right? And I also did this where I can select something like that. This is applying on mouse move, so that sort of shows how fast Angular is at just doing stuff, which is kind of nice. You can search through all your functions over here. So like if you want to see the factorial function, then I can click on that, and that's over here. I don't know if the syntax of this language is immediately apparent to people, but the way it works is it starts at the output and figures out what it needs to do first by like traveling to the right. So there's an if statement here, checks the condition, etc. This is a less than or equal to, and then the input, which it will then ask you about. So if you're like, you know, 10 factorial, then you get like a huge number. Anyway, so this is actually up on my website right now if you guys want to play with it. But yeah, I also used the you know, every function that you work on has a URL, so you can just, you know, make a new graph, gives you a new URL. You can start tossing stuff in there. So I can put in the factorial function and use that over there, and you know, and I can hit back and jump around. Oh, and the reason I was going to ask about custom inputs was because I decided to put the ACE editor in here. So if I double click on one of these things that's like one of the primitive functions like plus, then I'm editing code here in JavaScript that is the like definition of plus in my language, which is pretty much just evaluate the left side, evaluate the right side, and oh, that's the times actually. I couldn't read on this blurry screen. Anyway, but yeah, like it's super fun using Angular because everything just updates in real time. Like for example, like you can see the library over here that's got like the times in it, and it can be edited, like, you know, and that's fun. You know, I love that. Anyway, I don't know what else to say. Like, do you guys want to see me do anything in this language, or?
So where can we find the application?
Oh, this? It's at nickritalik.com/visual language. And there it is. So
cool.
Yeah, you can go there and play with it.
Can we have this on Built with Angular?
Sure, yeah.
And also the other app that you do full time at work.
Oh yes. So that one, I mean, I guess I can jump on there and show what I have on there. It's just a bunch of random files and stuff that I've been debugging stuff with. So this one, the actual data in here is not a like really an Angular thing. This is a directive that is using SlickGrid to do virtual rendering, so I can have an unlimited amount of stuff over here. And a lot of this stuff is just random stuff that like people have sent me for debugging purposes. So I claim no ownership for these files. But so you can flip through all this. There's a bunch of random weird stuff in here. Anyway, but it's kind of cool. Like if my screen was a bit bigger, I could show you that you can play music in this app and the playlist over there, and which is kind of cool. And it'll stream that, and you know, play other songs and stuff. And you can look through your photo albums and whatever. This is a weird game a friend of mine made about gerrymandering. These are some of the art assets from it. Anyway, it's got breadcrumbs up here. You can jump around. You can always hit back and go back through all the stuff, as long as Angular doesn't have some sort of bug where the something in the URL causes it to redirect. And you guys need to fix that, by the way. Sometimes if you link to something, then Angular will decide to change its mind about how that should be encoded in the URL, and then if you hit back, it'll be like, oh, well, I'm going to go back to the intermediate state, and then it's like, oh, now I'm going to redirect it forward again.
Did you file a bug?
I did like a long time ago, and you fixed like some of the cases. I worked around a lot of them, but there's still more of them that I keep running into. Anyway.
File a bug. Give
Okay.
us a test case that we can reproduce, and we'll fix it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you fixed a lot of them in RC8. Like, for example, the comma, or sorry, apostrophe in the URL and stuff like that. Anyway.
Apostrophe in URL, that's what I always put in my URL
Yeah.
too.
Those what?
Apostrophes in URL, that's what I do every day.
Well, you know, it's only in Firefox. It was just a weird thing. Anyway, so yeah, you can like look through photos and stuff. You can play videos and it transcodes them and all that. I don't know if that's relevant to Angular, but
It's a nice app.
oh yeah, and you can drag and drop stuff. And this is another thing where I'm like, you know, I'm calling apply on mouse move and it's fine, you know. And I can select a bunch of shit and I can just like move it around and throw it all over there and stuff. And so if I like go to my music, for example, I can just grab an album and throw it in there. If that works. Wait, that didn't work. Well, anyway, you know, I can grab the individual songs at least and throw them in there, I believe.
Or not.
Okay, you know what? I'm gonna debug this some more when I get back. But yeah, I don't know what to show.
Cool.
There's-
Awesome demo, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll be brief because we're already running over time, and I still want to have some extra time at the end just for you if you want to have questions that you want to ask one-on-one. So last week I think it was last week or the week before, we launched Built with Angular, which is like a gallery of applications built with Angular. Right now there are just 6 things in there, but it's gonna grow. Don't worry about it. If you have an Angular application, please let us know. And there is a way how you can submit your application to this gallery. We just need a screenshot and some metadata, and we'll be happy to promote your application. So please do submit your applications. Interesting part about this application is it's actually, of course, Angular application. And one thing that we were trying to solve that you don't typically see in other applications, we wanted the first page load to look really nice without any kind of double curlies or any kind of templating or stuff that you could see in toy applications or applications that are not built properly with Angular. So we put a lot of effort into making sure that the first page load is very smooth. And when I reload the page, you actually see that there's very little flicker. It's just the regular browser fetching the image. You don't see like a major parts of the application flickering. This is something that you would see in applications that people build without thinking too much about the first page load. So if you want to make your first page load look nice, you can look at the source code of this application and see how we managed to make it look very pretty. And the next thing that I wanted to talk about is the application that we've been building here at Google for a year and a half. Is it a year and a half now?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So it's actually DoubleClick. DoubleClick for advertisers. It's a huge part of Google that makes $1 or $2 or a couple billion. And they've been using Angular to build their new front end for advertisers. I cannot show you the application itself. I have some screenshots because you actually have to, it's a fancy application. You have to contact sales, and it's not your usual, register here and start using it application. So they've been using Angular for a year and a half. They've been going through all the breaking changes and having all the fun. We are so happy that we have them because this is a huge application. Like I think they have like
50 pages.
50 pages, and that's just very beginning. Like they are expanding. It's a team of 20 plus people working on this, and they've been providing us with very good feedback and steering the direction of the framework in very significant ways. So I have some screenshots, not too sexy, but better than nothing. So it's a typical CRUD application. It's a typical CRUD application with lots of listings of stuff from the database, lots of forms, lots of form validation, tabs. What you do is you create campaigns and you select your budget and do all this stuff, and then you launch it, and you get your advertisements to be displayed, or you buy the space and all that stuff. So this is really meant for advertisers and advertising agencies to buy and market their advertisements through DoubleClick. Maybe in the future we'll get somebody from the team to present and talk about how they built the application and what kind of things that they had to solve there. It's very interesting, very, very, very large application, completely built with Angular. And last thing I have is Angular 1.0 tomorrow. Yeah, so finally, there is like one last regression that we fixed today. Last major thing that needed to be fixed. That was done today, and I'll be cutting a release either tonight or tomorrow. So 1.0 tomorrow, and it's super exciting. So please help to spread the word, and get more people involved. Show them Angular, play with it, see why is it cool, why is it making you so productive and making you look good when you build these applications in no time. And I hope to see you again here in a month. I don't know what exactly we're going to do, what kind of topic. Hey, Angular 1.0 coming tomorrow. So we're probably going to talk about dependency injection or some other component of the framework that is very interesting, and do another deep dive into another part of Angular so that you get to know more about Angular. If you have anything specific that either you would like to see in the presentation, come talk to us afterwards, and we'll be happy to pick your brains on what to show or help you with addressing some issues or questions you might have on Angular. So thank you for coming, and I hope to see you next month. Bye.
Thank you, Igor, and thank you, Brian.